Hi, I'm Bob Switzer, and this is the Epic Narrative. Okay, so I know that we technically finished up chapter 18 last week, or whenever we aired this, but I need to go back to that last verse of chapter 18 before we start chapter 19, because it's one of those, it's just one of those things that we often miss because we read it in English, and we just read right over it. So the last verse of chapter 18 says, "The Philistine commanders continued to go out in battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known." So this is one of those time verses. This is probably at least a 2-year period of time, because you didn't go to battle year round. It's not like today where we have enough equipment and mobility to handle any kind of weather, to do battle on any kind of terrain. We have an amazing military machine. We also have a full-time military that's paid, maybe not as well as some people want them to be. I don't. That's politics, but we have a full-time military presence. That would not have been true in the time of the writing of this passage. Military, although you might have been drafted or conscripted into the military, it was only during certain times of the year that you would be ready to go and on call. You didn't necessarily go to the barracks and live for a couple years while you served your time. You were part of a farm. It was a huge agrarian society, mosly agrarian and trades. So odds are you were part of a farm or part of a collective that had village-wide produce, village-wide livestock, and you would participate in that. So there were certain times of year that you were needed back at your village, back at your family, back at your home, and that's where you would go. And so you couldn't go to war. And that was true for the Philistines as well. As much as the Philistines owned most of the coast, and most of their money was made in essence, the fishing trade, they had to go out and get the fish. And remember, they couldn't store fish in a freezer. They had to go out every day and get fish. They had to clean it. They had to dry it. They had to smoke it. And then they had to bring it to market if they wanted to get paid. And they didn't necessarily, it wasn't like they were a wealthy nation and had a standing army. They just had just as much of a commitment to daily life in order to make a living as anyone else. So when it says the Philistine commanders continued to go out to battle, and as often as they did, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers, and his name became well known. This would happen over several seasons of battles, and they would make arrangements to meet each other. Now, raiding parties might happen throughout the year. Okay, you would find out that there was a huge cash crop somewhere, and you want to frustrate and at some level devastate your enemy's ability to pay for the cost of war. You would try to decimate their economy so that they couldn't recover and couldn't, in essence, field an army whatsoever, or pay for allies, which often was the case. Mercenaries. There were some nations that sold their men out to be mercenaries to help out other nations. You could just buy an army, so to speak. So there were those sort of things. You wanted to take that away. So there would be raiding parties across the border for both, and this would fuel the rage, so that when it came time for battle, you would remember these things, and you as a commander would accentuate these things for your men, for your troops, so that they would get excited and be like, yeah, you wiped out this village. Yeah, you stole our sheep. You stole our livestock. You stole our money. and they would say, yeah, you burned our ship, or sunk our ship, or you stole our fish or burned our fish, and we couldn't, it go back and forth. And that was the essence of warfare. And then they would go at each other, but often they would go at each other. They would try and make it that champion thing, so that really only a few guys. And it wasn't always one-on-one. Sometimes you would pick the top 12. You'd pick the top 20, and it would basically be a mini battle, and you would just watch it and root for your team. And I get that. Not everybody wants to die. If you can negotiate something where not everybody wants to die. There's always a few guys in the military who don't think they will ever die, and they're willing to take on the world. And so you'd want them out front, and they would volunteer. They would step forward for these kind of battles. Anyways, as often as they went out, David met with more success than the rest of Saul's officers. That's just often, as often, right? It doesn't mean they went out often. It just meant every time they did, there was a number of officers in Saul's army. David was one of them. Remember, David was a son-in-law. David was somebody who Saul feared. So he was not in the daily interactions in the palace. David would go home to his apartment, to his house there in the capital city, and be with his wife. But generally speaking, David hung out in the wilderness. Not in the wilderness. He would hang out with the army. He would probably go back to Bethlehem and be near his family, although I don't think his family was that happy with that interaction. But I'm sure at some level his success brought fame and favor to his family, so his arrival would be something that they would want periodically, kind of like a celebrity sighting. All of this success, this national success, all of the fact that both Israel and Judah loved David, all of them wanting David to be the one who defended them. If the Philistines, and they would, this is the other thing, right? Militarily, they would make arrangements to meet with the Israelites, and they would say, all right, where do you want to get? Like, we're thinking this valley. Are you in agreement? This is where we're going to be. This is what day we're going to get there. So Israel would send out word to the commanders, and everybody wanted David to be the one who came. And of course, that wasn't, necessarily well received, because commanders tend to be, leaders. And some of them, many leaders, have a bit of an ego, much like a lot of pastors have a bit of an ego. It'd be like mega church. Currently, what are we talking about? Like, okay, we need a really good message. Let's see. Do we get Steve Furtick from Hillsong? Do we get Bill Johnson from Bethel? Do we get Joel Osteen from Texas? Like, these are all like commanders, so to speak. And then you send out your invitation as the group, the conference that's going on. Well, we want the very best. Okay, well, let's, we're going to put these guys in order of preference. And then you see who's available. You see who's ready. You see who's closest. You see who has, that opening. Well, it'd be the same sort of thing when looking for a commander to come to, defend your village, defend your region, defend your border, because you live close to the border. And you hope that it's David. Like, David probably was the top of everyone's list. And I say all this because of the first verse of chapter 19, where it says, Saul told his son Jonathan, and this is what's important, and all the attendants to kill David. So this is Saul. Saul's not sitting. I know that it just sounds like he's a lazy bum and not paying attention to things. Saul is back at the palace. He's observing and keeping track of what's going on in his nation. He's making decisions. He's fulfilling contracts. He's signing trade agreements. He's working on peace negotiations. He's trying to make sure the country runs well. He's a good king. Remember that, okay? Don't Don't constantly beat up Saul for just being this dote who wanted to kill David. Saul was a good king. Yes, I believe he strongly struggled with self-rejection, which I think we all do at some level. And I believe Saul struggled with it not only because of internal issues that he started to believe when he was a child, but I believe he struggled with it because of the religious mindset of so many people, including Samuel, who was the prophet of the day, and quote, the voice of God. I believe that all plays into Saul's struggles, but it doesn't mean that he's a horrible leader or a bad person. It just means he struggled. And so Saul's sitting here and he's seeing, probably for several years, he's seeing that David constantly has success. Like David's creativity and problem solving skills on the battlefield is making him a success on the battlefield. But more than that, the people who fight for David come back with rave reviews. Many times, as you know, right, you can work for somebody who's a good, quote, a good business leader. Like you go to work for a company or you go, to minister with an organization, and the reputation of the organization is great. But when you get to know the leadership, you're kind of like, yeah, like, nah, my time's up. Like, thanks for the opportunity. Bless you guys. I'm going to go work somewhere else. I'm going to go look for another calling. I'm going to go find another. I think I want to go over to this part of the world, or I think I'm going to focus on something else for the next whatever I'm going to do. So you could do that in the military as well, right? And you'd go home after battles and you'd be like, yeah, we won. That was great. It was awesome. But man, the commanders, oh my word, like they're so political, or they're so like, they try to motivate us with all of this like aggression, fear, like if we don't do this, like everyone's going to die. And like, I just remember, when I was working with David, when I was fighting for David, like, man, that was a good time. Like, man, he just knows how to lead people. And David's reputation, that's how his reputation spreads around the nation. People want if their children are going to be conscripted into the armed forces, or even if they want to volunteer, or even if they have to send their kids, they want them to be connected to David, because David not only wins on the battlefield, David wins the hearts of the men who fight for him. And not only do they fight with wisdom in the battle plan, but they fight from a heart of passion. They fight from a place of hope. They fight from a place of love for their nation, that allows them to do more and expect more of themselves when they're out on the battlefield. They feel more connected to who they're designed to be when they're in good leadership. That's true regardless of who you are as a leader. If you lead well, the people around you feel more connected to their identity when they're working for you, working alongside you, doing things that you've asked them to do. They feel more in line with their purpose and identity than they do with the task. If you're not a good leader, then the people who work for you are just doing things because they're told to do them, and eventually that gets really tiring, and it becomes a place where they start to lose purpose and direction. And David's men didn't do that. They didn't just go to battle out of fear, like, well, if I don't go to battle, my family will be thrown in prison, or I'll be killed, and my family will have to pay more in taxes, whatever. They didn't fight because of what might happen to them if they don't. They fought because of what they were fighting for. David gave them something to fight for, not a place of fear to fight from. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. It made sense in my head when I said it. Anyway, so all of this is going on. Saul keeps getting reports. He's glad that they're winning. Listen, he's glad that his nation is protected. He's glad that we're keeping the Philistines at bay. Even if some of his commanders might lose a battle or two, at least everything's working. But David's voice, David's heart, David's passion, David's leadership keeps coming back up, and people love him. Well, Saul basically takes his fear of David to the next level. He basically goes public. He stands up and he says to his attendants, which would be mostly family members, right? These are not like minions, slaves from other countries that are just kind of doting around, being treated poorly. These are attendants. These are people who are in the court. These are people that help him make decisions. These are people who have influence on people around the nation. And he says to him, to all of them, and to his son Jonathan, his oldest son, who would have been the crown prince, right? The one who takes over if Saul dies. Except Jonathan wouldn't take over if Saul dies, because Jonathan knows that he's already made a covenant with David and is willing to let David be the next king. But that's a whole nother layer of this relationship that will be developed even more so as we go forward. But he says to Jonathan and all of his attendants there in the throne room, he says, I want David to be killed. I want him dead. I mean, this going public is a big thing. It'd be like, not on the same scale, but let's say and I know that this happens on a smaller scale, right? The youth pastor is popular. The senior pastor is starting to hear that everybody loves the youth pastor. She's amazing. He's amazing. They're so, they're so smart. Their insights, their ideas are so, so new and fresh. And, my kids love them, and my kids can't wait to have them, when in a few years when they get older, or my kids wish that they were still at church so that they could have this guy or this girl as their youth pastor. And then the college students come back and they're like, hey, can we just hang out? Like, can we come to class with you? I know that sounds weird because of coronavirus. There probably aren't a whole lot of classes going on, but there should be, but that's a whole nother thing. Hopefully by the time you're hearing this, everything's wide open again. I just pray that it's all wide open again for you. So all of this is going on on a small scale, in a church, and somewhere along the line, the pastor says to the elders or to the board or to his associates, he says, you know what? I think it's time we get rid of him. And I think it's time that, I think, they keep doing these little things that are irritating me. And I think it's time we rotate somebody else in. It's not as serious. I don't think a pastor would say, I hope the youth pastor dies. But as far as what is growing in Saul's heart, that internal jealousy, there really isn't any place for it. There's no reason for it. Saul is king. David's just a commander in the army. He's a son-in-law, yes, but there's no need for the jealousy. Saul has all that he needs. He has everything he wants, including, if he wants, he has a connection to God whenever he wants it. We see that every time that David plays, he connects to heaven. God's there for him. It's an invitation to Saul. Stay here. Don't lose this awareness. Don't get distracted by what the enemy, has put in you. Don't get distracted by the lies that you believe from your childhood regarding your identity and your purpose in life. But he decides to go public. He says, you know what, Jonathan? You know what? Everybody, pay attention. I'm putting out a death warrant on David. I want David to die. But it says Jonathan had taken a great liking to David and warned him. Wow. A great liking. That's an intense phrasing. And I know that it gets twisted into a relationship that doesn't, you're stretching to the point where you're being ridiculous if you think that's what it means, but it doesn't. But it does mean that he really liked David, and he understood what God was doing, in that he saw that David, it wasn't that the Lord was on David's side and gave him an advantage. It's that the Lord was with David. In other words, David stayed connected to heaven. And he saw David as this amazing peer, this amazing friend. And Jonathan had this heart that mirrored David's connection to heaven. and he knew that what his father was doing wasn't right. So his first thing he did was he went out and he warned David. He's like, listen, my father Saul is looking for a chance to kill you. So be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. He's like, my dad is looking for a chance to kill you. You're close, like David's probably with Michelle at this point, or Michael, depending on how you want to say her name, in his apartment. Jonathan goes to see him, and he steps in. He's like, let's go outside and talk for a minute. Listen, my dad literally has put out a death warrant on you. Now, again, I don't think this was an unusual thing for Saul to do. I think he'd put out death warrants on a number of people. A lot of them were politically astute or powerful people. And when Saul felt threatened to a point where he didn't think he could figure out a political way to take advantage of the person, he'd put out a death warrant. And I think that is a general approach of people who lead from fear. To go back to our silly illustration about a youth pastor and a senior leader of some sort, when they feel threatened, when they lead from a place of fear and they feel threatened, they start to do things that will in essence kill the career of the person they feel threatened by. And if they are a radio host or a television, if they have some sort of huge media thing and they start to feel threatened by somebody else's media, they will start to attack that person. They will do what they can to kill that person's career, to kill that person's motivation. Is it motivation? Momentum. That's the word. Oh, I'm so glad you thought of that. Thank you. That was my executive intern there, engineering intern that was like, hey, Bob, I think what you mean to say is momentum. Yes, they'll do what they can to kill the momentum, right? They'll start to cut down other ministries and other churches. And I've been around people like that. They're not fun to be around. They think they're funny. They think that it's arrogance, right? It's pride. It's self-rejection. It's what Saul deals with. And so he looks at David, and David has now reached the level of, all right, I just need to take him out. Like, keeping him out of the palace, keeping him on the battlefield isn't working. The Philistines haven't killed him yet. The men keep falling in love with him. The nation keeps falling in love with him. All of this popularity, I need to put out a death warrant. So Jonathan goes and he tells David this. Listen, you need to be on your guard tomorrow morning. Go into hiding and stay there. I'm going to go out and stand with my father in the field where you're hiding. And I'm going to talk to him about you. And I will tell you what I find out. So this has to be a generally popular field, so to speak. A place where, not so to speak, why do you keep using that phrase? It drives me crazy. I can't imagine the people that are listening to you. Oh my word, stop saying that. Or at least don't say it as much. Okay, I will. I'll try and keep that in mind. Thank you very much. This field had to be something that Saul would go to on a regular basis. I don't think this was out of the ordinary for Jonathan and Saul to go walking in this field. And I don't think it was a field that was like it probably wasn't manicured, but it probably was it probably was attended to so that it was safe. It was, it probably had a lot of, maybe organized in the way the bushes were, like maybe it was manicured to that level. It depends. I guess, use your imagination on this. But it clearly had places where you couldn't see everything, whether it be rocks, whether by design, formations of rocks or statues, or by hedges, various bushes that are there, or just trees. It could have just been a somewhat walled off or at least guarded field so that the king could go for a walk in the field. And this is true for, most everyone who deals with a ton of, we'll say, work stress. They usually like somewhere where they can go to sit and be quiet. Sometimes it's a park in the city. They just find their favorite bench and they sit. But oftentimes, if they can, they have a piece of property somewhere where they can just go and walk. I know executives, in Boston. I know executives in Hartford, and they have made their backyards into sanctuaries. right? Where they can just go and be quiet. They can go for a walk. They can, quote, putter around. I know some who own huge tracts of land, right? In Maine or Vermont or New Hampshire, and they go up there and they get on a tractor and start ripping things, or ripping trees out or stumps out or moving large boulders. Why? Because at work, it's just all on a screen, and it's frustrating, and as far as the capacity of their vision. But man, when they get out on their property, they get out in their backyard, their vision opens and they're able to breathe. So this is the sort of thing that I think is going on in this field. And Jonathan knows, listen, my dad and I will go for a walk tomorrow in the field. You hide. And when I'm done talking to him, I'll come talk to you. I don't think Jonathan was trying to be deceptive. I think Jonathan was doing what he could to restore relationship between his father, who he believed and honored as a good man, and his best friend and brother, David, who he believed was a good and honorable man. You see, honor does not mean blind obedience. Honor is guided by love. There's a lot of times that parents and preachers and Sunday school teachers, we got a rhythm going. No, stop. Have used the concept of honor for blind obedience. You will honor me. You need to honor your elders. You need to honor your authorities. And by that, what they're trying to imply is you need to obey me. You need to do what I say. You need to honor me. But honor is not blind obedience. And Jonathan understands the culture of honor. And Jonathan knows that his father has a good heart. He's seen his father in worship. He's been with his father in worship. He's heard his father prophesy and speak the hope and love and passions and perspectives of heaven. He knows his dad's a good man. He also knows when his dad's made a decision that isn't that good. He knows that David hasn't been on his dad's favorite person list for a long time. He knows that. But that's far different than putting out a death warrant on somebody. David and Saul were, in essence, I think, like I've said before, I think that they were very much alike. I think that's also part of the reason why Saul would whip around from one extreme to the other, because he saw in David himself, and he saw the heart of David for God, and he knew that was his heart as well. And then he'd go from there from inspired to angry and frustrated. And he would see David as the reason why he couldn't get close to God. Like he would blame David's relationship with God for the reason why his relationship with God wasn't good. And then he would take on that same attitude that Cain had against Abel, which was, hey, if I take out my competition, then God, I'm the only one that God can deal with. I'll be his favorite again, not realizing that what God was after was after the heart. He didn't care what was going on. He didn't care what the sacrifice was for Cain and Abel. He really didn't. He cared about the heart. And for the same is true with Saul. He cared about Saul's heart. And I think Jonathan honored the perspective that God had on Saul, which was, he's a good man and I love him and his heart is amazing. And if he just would stay in awareness of my presence, he would be like he would understand the favor and adoration of heaven all the time. And he would walk in that, in the wisdom and creativity and favor and blessings of God. But he doesn't. And I wish he would. And I think Jonathan honored that. And when he saw that his father put out a death warrant and heard his father say, I want David killed, he knew, all right, I need to step in, but I need to do this with honor. I need to approach this from the position of heaven. Man, there are so many people that if given this opportunity, they would have raged against authority. They would have raged against this declaration, right? That I want David killed. Man, I tell you, Jonathan handled this so well. So I'll walk you through it. So he steps in, he warns David, but he doesn't send David away. Okay, he doesn't try to make David into a rebel. Hey, my dad wants to kill you, but I know that, he shouldn't be doing that. He's such a bad leader. He makes really bad decisions. Let me go through the list of decisions that my father's made that, man, I'm telling you, you've been out on the field. I've been in the throne room. I've been in the board meetings. My father is, he makes so many rash decisions and decisions based in fear. And we need a leader who makes decisions in hope and love. He doesn't do any of that. He doesn't try to divide Saul from David. He doesn't try to divide physically Saul and David. He doesn't say, listen, David, you need to run away and get as far from here as possible. And I'll send word to you if things straighten out. He says, listen, I need you to go into hiding. Why? Because it's safe for you. And if I don't send you into hiding and one of these attendants sees you walking around, you could be dead before I get around to talking to my father. So I need you to just go into hiding and go into the field where I know I'm going to be with my dad tomorrow morning. And we're going to go for a walk and I'm going to talk to my dad. See, Jonathan knew if he could help his father, if he could relationally connect to his dad, he could relationally bring his father to a different perspective. He could honor his father's heart. He could honor his father's goodness in a way that wasn't going to be threatening, in a way that would allow him to still be in authority. So he went for a walk with his father. I've been on walks like this, like you need to bring something up with a family member. And it's not going to be the easiest conversation to have. It's going to be a little awkward. Now, Jonathan at least probably had seen his father on a pretty regular basis, probably daily. So he had enough of experiential conversation, to be able to have with his father so that he didn't have to just have that awkward silence and then say, so the reason why I got you on the phone, or the reason why we got together today, or the reason why I wanted to have coffee with you was this. And then just put that harsh thing on the table. I have a feeling he saw him in the morning. He's like, good morning, Dad. He's like, good morning, son. I'm so proud of you. I think you're awesome. And Jonathan's like, thanks, Dad. I think you're pretty awesome as well. I think you do a good job as a king. You made, yesterday when you made this decision, or 2 weeks ago, like I think that contract that you made with the trade agreement that you made with that tribe, with that village, with that market conglomerate, I think that was really good. I think that's really reaping benefits. Like they probably had a very gentle conversation for a while. And then Jonathan spoke well of David. And again, it doesn't mean that he literally just started out with the phrase, let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He has not wronged you. What has he done? What he has done has benefited you greatly. He didn't start there. It says he spoke well of David to Saul, his father. So that would mean that he brought up mutually beneficial, probably anecdotes. Some of them were funny. Some of them were about war. Some of them were about family. It probably had some laughs. And Saul probably was thinking, I kind of know where this is going. And I sense when I read this, I just think Jonathan's heart, his love for his dad just came out on this. He's like, listen, I don't think you have the right perception on what's going on here. But what did he start out with? Let not the king do wrong to his servant David. He puts Saul where he belongs, which is he's king. You're king. You control everything in this nation, including David. He's your servant. David, he gives him a perspective. He's like, David has only done what he's told. And what he has done has benefited you greatly. He's benefited you, and in essence, benefited the nation. David has allowed you to remain king because he keeps winning battles for the nation. David is not trying to put together his own little army for a military coup. David goes out and he wins in the season of war, and then the men go back to their places. David does not try to keep any of his men around him. David comes back here to the city where you can see him and everyone can see him. He doesn't go back to his home in Bethlehem and again try to work the political realm and cause strife in the nation. He unifies the nation, and he unifies the nation under you. He says, your attitudes, Dad, your perceptions are wrong here. This is the first thing you want to do when you want an honorable confrontation and a call for a change of perspective. Another way of saying a change of perspective is repentance. He's like, this is how, Dad, you just need to come up a little higher. You need to look at this from a different perspective. He says this about David. He took his life in his hands when he killed the Philistine. The Lord won a great victory for all of Israel. You saw it. You were glad. He's like, Dad, listen, your perception needs to change. And your charges about him being, somebody who needs to be killed, about being somebody who's a danger to you, your charges are inaccurate. You have forgotten the truth. You have forgotten love. Right? All of this is contained in these phrases. If we read them too quickly, we lose it. And we just think that Jonathan confronted his father. The first thing you do in confrontation is you say, you are about to do something wrong. Now, da-da-da-da-da. Now, da-da-da-da. Do what I tell you. No, Jonathan, this is a beautiful, honorable confrontation. This is the way you want confrontation to go. So he says, listen, your charges are inaccurate. He works for you. He's a servant of you. You don't, if you look at this correctly, you realize he hasn't wronged you. He hasn't done anything to attack you. He hasn't done anything to take the nation away from you. As a matter of fact, Dad, if we look at this correctly, if we look at this, if we repent, if we take it from a higher perspective, he's actually done everything for you. And he continues to do things for you to the point where he was willing and continues to be willing to die in the hands of the Philistines for the sake of this nation. The Lord keeps giving him great victory because he gives him victories for the nation. Why? Now this is awesome because this is another key to an honorable confrontation. My wife likes to say it this way: stay curious. Stay curious. And what that means when you're communicating is ask for understanding. I use the phrase a lot like this. I'll say, so help me understand what's going on here, because this is what I see and this is what I hear. And Jonathan's doing the same sort of thing here. He's saying, listen, Dad, this is the way I think we should be looking at this. Like, this is what I see. I see a man who serves you. I see a man who has not wronged you. I see a man who will give his life for you and for the nation. I see God bringing victories to the nation, and David gives credit to God for the nation, and he unites people under you. He's not dividing the nation. He's not trying to take your throne. He's not in the position that you think he's in. So help me understand why there's a death warrant out on David. Because I'm not seeing the reasoning behind your declaration yesterday. Again, he doesn't attack the declaration. He literally asks his father for explanation. He's like, help me understand what's going on here, Dad. Why are we trying to kill David? He doesn't say, I'm not going to kill David. And I'm going to tell the attendants they shouldn't kill David because David's an innocent man. You can't kill an innocent man. You're being a bad leader. You're being a bad king. You're not even very good at being a friend or a father at this point. I think you've got some serious issues, Dad. He doesn't do any of that. He says, help me understand the reasoning behind this. Why are we trying to kill David? I think he's an innocent man. I've just laid that out for you. I don't think there's any reason for it. So help me understand why then are we trying to kill him? And it says this in verse 6. This is so awesome. So Saul listened to Jonathan and took this oath. Now, before I get into the oath, which is the rest of the verse, it's not that long. Saul listened to Jonathan. This is pretty big. Because Jonathan had the role and the relationship needed for this confrontation. You need to stay aware. You need to stay aware of your role in someone's life. Now, I'm a pastor, right? I'm currently at the church, I'm the family life pastor. But if someone doesn't invite me in to a conversation or into a confrontation or into a counseling situation, if I'm not invited in, I have to be really careful of what my role is. Sometimes I can present something to somebody as my role as pastor. If they attend regularly, we don't really have membership at our church. But if they attend regularly and I kind of have a role as pastor, I can give them a call or I can catch them, during a service, and I can say, hey, I noticed this, or hey, let's get together. I'd like to just catch up on how things are going. I can do that as my role as pastor, but I've learned I have to wait. If somebody doesn't want my input, then my input is really not going to be listened to, even if it's filled with wisdom and solution. I have to wait for the right time, and I have to wait for the right role. Now, the deeper my relationship is with somebody, the easier it is to take on that role, because the depth of relationship, the quote intimacy of the relationship, the length of experience we've had together, that allows for more on-ramps, more inroads, more opportunity to step into places that might be difficult and have a conversation. And when I have that conversation, when the relationship is right and the timing is right, then the person is able to listen. They're not defensive. This is why we know Jonathan did the right thing, and he did it the right way, is because Saul listened to Jonathan. And he took this oath. As surely as the Lord lives, David will not be put to death. Well, look at that. He withdrew the warrant of death for David. He listened to Jonathan's presentation of a heavenly perspective, and he tracked with it. And he sat there for a moment, stood there, probably didn't stand there. I have a feeling they were kind of doing that slow, wandering, meandering walk through the field. I picture Jonathan to be a fairly happy guy. I picture him smiling at his father, putting his arm around his dad, looking at him, saying, "Listen, Dad, I just think you need to change your perspective on this. I don't think you're accurately bringing. I don't think your accusations are correct. I think if we look at it a little differently, you'll actually see that David's actually working for you, that he loves you and he loves this nation. And I don't think he has any guilt that warrants a death. I'm just saying." And Saul listened. That's how we know Jonathan did it right. And he withdraws the warrant. And then in verse 7 it says, so Jonathan calls David and told him the whole conversation, which means it's way longer than the 2 verses that are listed here in Scripture. And then he says he brought him to Saul, and David was with Saul as before. Another key phrase in the story. We know that I believe it was in chapter 17. I'm not looking at it right now, but I believe in chapter 17, right? David was in a place of great favor and in the palace. And then David was not, and Saul became suspicious, and David had to kind of stay out of the palace because Saul wouldn't invite him in. He didn't want David's perspective. He didn't want David's wisdom. He didn't want David's voice. He didn't want David to, quote, steal the elders from him, to steal the counsel from him, to steal the fathers of the nation from him. So like he did with the military guys, right? So he had separated himself from David. But that phrase, as before, David was with Saul as before. It means he brought him back to the table. He brought him back into the council room. He brought him back to the interactions and relational connection that they had from at the beginning, when right after he had killed Goliath. That those early days, that's where it was. There was this family connection again. David had a father that he never had before, somebody who admired him, encouraged him, and blessed him in front of others. This is what Saul started to do again. And why? Because Jonathan called David, told him the whole conversation, and Jonathan, brought him to Saul. So there was this friendship, this family connection. This was one brother restoring another brother to a father. And it was blessed, and it was passionate, and it was awesome, and it is exactly what the heart of God is like. He's always looking to restore. He's always looking to bring people back to where they were designed to be. And we were designed to be in the garden. That's the beauty of the gospel of heaven. The gospel of heaven restores us back to our original design, restores us back to our original passions and purpose of heaven here on earth, to spread the garden throughout the earth. The earth was in great shape, right? The earth was created and it was beautiful, and then God put a garden in the middle of it, which had to be even like I don't even know how you make something that was good, right? God created the earth and it was good, and then he puts a garden in it and basically says, yeah, and this is 10 times better. And now you get to take this and spread it all over the earth. I know I'm getting ahead of myself, because I actually, after the story of David, we're going to go into Genesis and rip that apart. But that our original design was there. And this is what God loves to do. He loves to restore us back to relationship, restore us back to, in essence, resurrecting what was dead. And that's what he did here. He took something. Saul had killed the relationship between him and David, and now the relationship's restored. And Jonathan had a role in this. Why? Because Jonathan was the one who did the honorable thing. His honor was not blind obedience. It was guided by love. Jonathan is an amazing character in Scripture because we see windows of his heart, right? We see a window in his heart when he attacked the Philistines on his own and said, if God is with us, then God is with us. And if we die, we die. It doesn't matter. My passion is for heaven. My passion is for the people of God. I'm going to do what I need to do. And we see his heart here where he's like, I'm going to honor my father, and I'm just going to help him. I'm going to give him an opportunity, not help him do it. I'm going to give him an opportunity to change his perspective to something higher. And I'm going to ask him to help me understand the reasoning behind his decision. And that's exactly what he did. And he did it in such a way that Saul, despite all the fear and self-rejection that Saul deals with, Saul was able to listen to Jonathan because Jonathan did it right. And then he restored, he rescinded his death warrant, and then Jonathan was able to bring David in before Saul, and that means he brought him into the throne room. There was kind of a ceremonial reconnection. Everyone knew. Why? Because Saul had made a public declaration about wanting David dead, and now he made a public example. He had a public declaration, but a public example that he and David were restored. And David was as before. He was in the palace this time. He was in the council. He was at the dinner table with the family, he and his wife, and everybody was in a good spot. And I'm going to stop there because I just want you to rest in this good moment where David went from a fugitive, and in 24 hours later, he was forgiven and fully restored. That's a really good place in this story. I want you to rest there. Doesn't last for long, but I want you to rest there. And I hope you guys have a great day.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of The Epic Narrative. If you have questions for Bob or would like to reach out for booking, please email us at thebobswitzer@gmail.com or visit thebobswitzer.com. If you haven't already, please subscribe to The Epic Narrative podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever fine podcasts are downloaded. See you next week for another chapter in our story on The Epic Narrative.